and coordinator for the Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey, and welcome to the first of our four presentations that we're going to be doing for Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Christine Palladino, our prevention specialist in IGRS, is going to present on the topic of treatment and I should say, gambling and first responders. Um, as you know, the council offers support, hope, and treatment. And I'm going to turn things over to her and we will get going. Thank you all for coming this morning. Adrian will leave you some directions about how to receive your certificates for attending in the chat box. And if you follow her directions, I assure you, you will get one. All right, Christine, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So glad you're here. And yeah, so we're going to get into it so we don't hold up too much time. So the topic today is first to respond, last to recover. It's going to be the paradox that first responders who are trained to manage crisis for others, we're going to kind of go into the prevalence of first responders and disordered gambling and gambling issues. And when we get, as we go through, we're going to kind of go over the barriers that there are to the first responders getting help for either mental health or gambling disorder. All right. So, of course, for those of you who do not know what we do here, as Lenny mentioned, these are some of the things that we're passionate about doing here at the council. And I'm excited to start off PGAM this way. All right, here we go. Topics and objectives. We're going to go over who first responders are, gambling prevalence, risks and influences, consequences. Got some headlines. We're going to go into the fraud quadrangle and signs and symptoms, barriers, and specialized treatment and resources that are available currently. All right, who are first responders? So these are the titles. For the purpose of this presentation, we'll be highlighting law enforcement, firefighters, and EMTs. The job descriptions are commonly known to a general population, and to go into what they actually are also is brave individuals. They have a large amount of responsibility, exposed to high levels of danger, under tremendous pressures. They hold a lot of esteem in their communities. And of course, they're exposed to high levels of danger. Okay, so here we do take it serious. However, this is basically a first responder's brain, where most people have, put it here, where most people have constant spinal fluid, keeping their brains nice and cushy. First responder brains have coffee and other caffeinated liquids that keep them running. How they sleep, well, there's not much of it. Over here, it's called the shut up gland. It shuts down the verbal system to stop them from saying something stupid. It works with administration, but completely shuts down as of 3 a.m. Over here is the memory gland. This is where they keep protocols, guidelines. It actually comes into play about 15 times larger when remembering the things that coworkers did to secure a promotion. And then the love gland, greetings and farewells. 90% of conversations come over here to the dark humor glands. And with that, um, let's just put it this way. So, a normal person, we come in, we say, good morning, how are you? With and somebody's going to respond. So, for instance, good morning, Len, how are you today? Len would say, I'm doing well, thank you. But a first responder, it turns into, what's up, bro? I see you bought a car and traded your truck. Did you trade your manhood into? it all links to linguistics. There we go. And basically, all the thes and the a's turn into some kind of curse word somewhere. There's a hidden regret glands, and that's not shown, where you regret things that you do. This is mostly for police officers who regret not passing a firefighter exam. Let's put it that way. So that is explained. Now, that brain is going on here in this picture, pretty much. So if anyone wants to recognize this face right here, I will let them say hello.
Hello?
Yes, that is Lenny. So, okay. Now let's get into it. Prevalence comparison. First responders versus the general population. We can kind of see here the percentage, and at-risk behavior is an additional 10% are classified as at-risk gamblers, meaning they show signs of problematic behavior that hasn't yet reached a clinical diagnosis. Problem gambling, roughly 2.3% of first responders meet the clinical criteria for problem gamblers. The overall prevalence, approximately 12.3% of first responders report some level of gambling related issues. So we can kind of see the at high risk that they are. All right. So some core statistics, gender and age. Among the broader high-risk groups, men and individuals 18 to 34 show the highest rates of concerning behavior amongst this population. The substance misuse comparison is higher. Gambling problem is higher than rates for harmful drinking, illicit drug use within the population. Now, comparison to mental health. The rate of problem gambling in this group is comparable to other major conditions, PTSD, anxiety, depression, and we're going to get into those a little more detail in an upcoming slide. Now, there is a military overlap, specifically police officers. Military personnel screen for gambling problems, as we know, at a double the rate of the general population. Many first responders transition from military to these positions. The DOJ, United States Department of Justice, reported that nearly 25% of police officers in the United States have military background. So it's kind of setting it up that those things are going to come into play. So we know that large amounts of research confirm that problem gambling co-occurs with a significant number of mental and behavioral issues. I think we know that. You probably see it for the providers. You know, you see it a lot. We know what the damage is and how it's a big, we have a big mental health when we talk about gambling, the mental health aspects and correlations. So the ones that we are going to go over, since there's a lot of them, we're going to break it down to anxiety, depression, bipolar, chronic stress, PTSD, and suicidality. Okay. Now, first responders are often screened prior to appointment for these issues. The signs, symptoms, and occurrence manifest over time because of experience in the jobs. Now, I personally had gone through this, being a first responder, and all through the career, it progressively, digressed for me. And I had gone a very long time not ever being diagnosed with any of the things that I ended up having. So it took me being into recovery and, approaching my recovery to lead me to seek help for the other things that I'm being diagnosed with. So, key factors. Shift work is a huge influence. When night shift work is associated with 24.2% of problem gambling among those who gamble significantly higher than non-night shift workers. So, as an example, I remember at the height towards the end of my active gambling, there were times when I would be working a midnight shift. It's slow, it's quiet, and here I am on my phone playing playing slot machines, gambling away. At 7 a.m., when I got off work, instead of going home, I would drive down to Atlantic City and I would sit there. Next thing I know, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and no sleeping. I'm struggling, I'm going, taking my sick time. Nope, not going to be back, trying to get people to switch these shifts with me. So the so yeah, shift work, the irregular hours, isolation, it just gave me for me personally, it gave me the opportunity for the online gambling during that time. Okay. So now this was interesting. The bipolar effect. The bipolar effect is a first responder goes through on a regular basis. So during a shift, fight or flight. You get in there, you don't know what you're expecting, you're at work. This is what it's going to be. That's very similar to that manic state. After your shift is over or after you finish that call, right there, it, in that come down period, it's like being in the depression state of bipolar. Okay. There's the adrenaline factor. It's that rush. We hear how problem gamblers experience that high. And that's very familiar to a first responder because that gives you that adrenaline rush, that next win, chase that loss. Those are all very similar to the adrenaline factor, and they might miss that if they're off shift. Contrary, there's the burnout and compassion fatigue. First responders experience emotional exhaustion. You have to be right. You can't you stay calm. You can't break down and there's just no other release for that. You're going to have a reduced sense of professional efficiency. It's going to come down. A lot of things that you'll notice with first responders as well is they're going to lose that empathy factor because that shows weakness. Okay. So, of course, the big one, let's make the trauma correlation. First responders who have experienced a higher number of diverse traumatic events are statistically more likely to develop gambling problems. It was definitely an escape. I was an escape gambler. I have friends that worked with me and we always found something. Okay. It was, that unwind time, kind of go into that depressive state. And it's, hey, we just want to come back and, we're not going to come back from necessarily a call and sit around and talk about our feelings. That's not what we were doing. We were almost hiding them and masking them. So the traumatic experiences, well, we kind of look past that. Now, in these examples here, that's like a moment. It's a moment in time. Shake it off and get on with it. So here it is. The gambling is a coping mechanism, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. So I have a couple examples of photos here where, you have everybody just chilling out. Getting together, the brotherhoods, playing your card games, hey, we're just trying to do some downtime in between shifts. Again, we're covering things up. Now, something that I found in the research was there are things like first responders, you can win tickets. They have First Responder Bowl, college football betting. And then, all too often, we appreciate everything you do. So it's almost like we're opening it up. Come to the casinos, do some gambling. We respect you. We want to do this. So it's making it more available. So that would, having these things here, it's kind of making it easy. So I know for me, it was okay. We got, I have all these things that I do. I answer fire calls. I do this, I do that. And it's almost like I was saying, Christine, you do all these things, you deserve a break. And if I look at a casino here, well, they appreciate everything I do. So they're going to give me more reasons to say I deserve that break, which just led to more gambling and trauma and taking it all in, especially the anxiety, because gambling made me feel better. I had a good day, I wanted to gamble. I had a bad day, I wanted to gamble. The stress was just, you know, go ahead, have a good time, Christine. Look, they love you. So when we talk about PTSD and depression, they are estimated to be 5 times more common in first responders than in the general population. The common symptoms: relieving past traumatic events, focus and memory problems, anxiety, avoiding the reminders of trauma, depression and isolation, and total detachment. This is where we kind of come into the hidden addiction. PTSD rates among first responders are as high as 30%. So when we looked at the first responder brain, now we can look at what it really is, putting it all together. These are all the things that are really going on in the brain, but we had to put some dark humor into it. So here is what we're basically looking at, and all of these things you put on any kind of addiction, specifically, with the gambling piece, there's just a setup for disaster. Okay, and of course, the critical link between gambling and suicide. The highest risk. Gambling disorder has one of the highest suicide rates among all addictions, as we know. First responders are more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. Rates among some groups are nearly 10 times higher than the national average. And there's the escape model. Responders may view suicide as the only honorable way out of massive gambling debt to ensure family insurance payouts. With that in mind, some of the common first responder problem gambling consequences. It's going to have an impact on performance, compromised cognitive functions, financial ruin, disciplinary actions, termination, and engagement in illegal acts to cover gambling losses. So to look at some of these, let's look at the headlines. So these are in order from, this is more recent, and we're going to go basically back to within the last, I'd say, 10 years back that I have some examples. So we have a former volunteer fire department treasurer charged with embezzlement. Basically, it's deposited cash into his personal bank account and gambled approximately $37,000 using FanDuel during this time, according to the complaint. Then we have a former treasurer pleading guilty for stealing $450K from the volunteer fire company, withdrawals from the fire company's bank account, and failing to deposit money from fundraiser proceeds, and use the stolen money to support his gambling habit. Gambling drives cop to steal $200K in evidence money. This is from February of last year. More than $200,000 cash seized from evidence to fund a gambling habit. Gambling problem led county fire company social club member to steal 80K. Ex-treasurer of fire department charged with stealing 900,000 from volunteer company. Former treasurer of the fire department was charged with stealing company funds to support his gambling habit. Now, these are all real examples. Yeah, one more, sorry. These are all real examples that I found in newspapers. 13-count indictment accuses the longtime chief of theft, embezzlement, and making false statements. Firefighter retirement money on casinos. Now, these all are just some of the examples. There's a new one every single day, at least every other day. These things are happening. These are the ones that are specific to gambling. Now, one I'm all too familiar with was mine. I understand all of, you know, the whole point where I had the theft by deception charge. However, on top of that was the official misconduct. So when we go back to all those consequences I faced personally. And after, with this incident, on top of my charge, I had the official misconduct charge, which gave me mandatory prison time. And it was, they always said to me, well, we have to make an example out of you. So that was back in 2019. And that example just continues. Public service entities depend on public money to operate and survive. Stealing the money for personal use becomes a breach of the public trust. And we see that in numerous cases, and it definitely is not isolated. So, why? A financial need that causes the theft. It's easy. Okay. An opportunity. There is a need. There's the need for the money. There's an opportunity for, to be able to take it. First responders can rationalize stealing from the public. It's victim fee, or victim free. The theft can be rationalized due to the audacity of the crime and the trust that's placed in those who manage the money of these departments. It may never be discovered. When I first started taking the money, it was once or twice. And, it started that way. And I said, okay, I can pay it back. So once or twice, because of a personal issue, return the money and then it's not caught. So it's like, well, okay, I did that. I could pay it back. So now the next time I take money, I can do the same thing. But there's still the factor that I wasn't caught. So it's going to happen until they are caught. And especially when you're in the midst of that gambling addiction, it's, we're going to keep going. We're going to chase it. We'll be able to get it back. We'll be able to win it back. Personally, for me, it didn't matter. As long as I had the money, I just kept going. Didn't matter how much I was spending. Didn't matter how much I was losing. It was always going to, it was always going to be okay because I wasn't getting caught yet. Okay. So when we look at some of the hidden signs, workplace indicators, increased secrecy. I lived by myself. No one had to know my comings and goings. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. So, yes, I was hiding it, but I also wasn't saying anything, which was basically lying. Requesting overtime for financial emergencies. That was, that was it too. I always had a good work ethic overall. But I was constantly going for the overtime. I want the extra money or I want the extra time because that's going to lead to I could take a day off and I can go to Atlantic City and I can have a great time. And a lot of my days off and planned days off were because I was headed somewhere that I could gamble. Obsessive checking of sports scores, betting apps, frequent absences and tardiness, neglecting personal hygiene and appearance. You might see someone that, man, I got off work at 11. I headed down to Atlantic City or I went out and I was, on my phone until who knows what time. You're running late for your next shift. Probably didn't shower, just changed right into that uniform and, went about the day. The poor job performance and work quality is going to go down because their mind is elsewhere when they have to deal with these emergency situations. Irritability when unable to gamble, sleep disturbances, withdrawal from the brotherhood or sisterhood of the unit. I was not seen. And there's a lot of times when I was in the firehouse and we're all getting together, kind of like that picture where everyone's around, doing something, whether we're playing cards or just discussing what we're going to do next. There was a disconnect because again, I'm hiding it. Nobody needs to know what I was doing. But if I was going, oh yeah, I'm going away this weekend. Where are you going to be? I'm going to be in Atlantic City. How many times I let my brothers and sisters come down, use my comps. Hey, I can get a room. I just want you guys to come and hang out with me and see how good I'm doing. That was, that was the mindset. So, psychological first aid for first responders. This is what we are advised as first responders, what they are advised not to do. So they come in contact with someone who has mental issues. They are told not to force people to share their stories with you. They are told not to give simple reassurances like everything will be okay. They are told not to tell people why you think they have suffered, why they think they have suffered. They are told to make promises that cannot be kept. They are told not to criticize existing services or relief efforts in front of people in need of those services. So we can't, badmouth our chief. We can't, badmouth our response time. So having to follow the guidelines that you see here, interacting with the public, it can be confusing if you yourself need to get help for a mental crisis being in that population. You're constantly like, oh, this is that stigma is so there in these populations for any mental health and not just a gambling problem, but for all mental health. And I think this is something that definitely needs to be addressed further. And the first responder who's trained like this, you're gonna have that. There's no empathy there. It's you can't be real. And I think that's, kind of leading into the barriers that we're going to see for seeking treatment. Barriers to seeking treatment. The help seeking gap is only 2.1% of individuals with gambling problems in related high stress fields. That's not very high. The reasons are fear of job loss, that stigma, the lack of resources, the lack of confidentiality, and the denial. Are, I I don't think I have a problem. This is just a way for me to relax. The lack of confidentiality, it's, well, if I talk to somebody, how is it not going to affect my family? How is it not going to get out? Like if I come to somebody and say, "Oh, I'm a police officer and I have a gambling addiction," how can I trust someone fully like that? And there's the stigma, for the longest time, if you had some kind of mental health issue, you were not good enough to do your job. Okay, you're unfit for duty. So that constant fear of having a job loss, it's definitely, these are definitely barriers that we're going to face, going out there. And for you as providers coming across this, um, it we're going to withdraw. You're not going to get the whole story sometimes. So when we talk about different pathways to recovery, confidential support is huge when coming in contact with a first responder and dealing with their treatment. It has to be emphasized that seeking help is strength, not failure. Peer support. Utilize trained peers who understand the specific culture of law enforcement or fire services or dealing with this population. Lived experience. I understand. And, I'm where you are. And I know this comes up for me, I do when I go out to presentations or I talk to people, it's not uncommon for someone to say, wow, you know what? I am in this service. I am in that service and I'm dealing, with this addiction. And, just the fact that someone with lived experience can just come out and tell their story, that's enough because they look at you as a peer. We have the immediate action, of course, for any help. They have specialized resources, specifically to, this is the international firefighters. They have recovery centers. There are specialized addiction treatment programs. And they're both outpatient or inpatient. They show that that is the greatest benefit. Now, trauma-informed therapy. I want to speak about that because I think that is huge for especially this population. It was easier for me to talk to someone to say, I know what you've been through, not to just sugarcoat it and say, yeah, that happens. There was a time where I felt kind of like, like I was being told by a coworker who was, administration, a little higher than me, and there was a coworker that basically said, "Well, that was just, it's just joking around, It doesn't bother you, right?" Almost like I was being told not to feel a certain way because I was treated a certain way. And that just, again, just glaze it over. I wanted my trauma to be recognized. I wanted it to be pulled out. And trauma informed therapy is great. And I know, most of us use some part of that, especially as a treatment provider, whether it's CBT, EMDR. It can definitely help first responders to reframe their experiences in a way that they can understand. Of course, there's group therapy. Gender specific support is also very big because a female in a more male dominated, uh, whether it's a service, I might have been more, I might be more open to getting therapy if it's just a bunch of girls, and vice versa. So gender specific support for this population is definitely a avenue to go through. There are 12-step support groups for first responders only. Since the first responders face challenges and stressors on a daily basis, it can always take a toll on their mental health for all those things. So, as you can see in the picture, honoring the situation, finding the opportunity, plan the intervention, engage with a support network. Okay. So, finally, what needs to be done? Number one, increasing awareness. It has to be known that here's a problem, here's what we see, how can we help? Increasing awareness of problem gambling and the things that we've gone over today with the correlation of, look, you're already at risk for this, but adding this is going to make it a lot worse. Proper screening, go over those warning signs. These departments really have to break this stigma from the inside. Make sure that they know the support systems. Make sure it's, kind of find some way to not just screen the first responders prior to them, you know, getting getting the first job, and then maybe do it in intervals. Like, hey, you know what? Maybe we should add this into our prevention and whatnot in the department specifically. Now, the biggest one, and this was hard because putting this whole thing together, the research to address gambling behavior among first responders is almost non-existent. There's a lot of it goes by approximate. Firefighters, very high. There's a lot more research on firefighters than there are on EMTs and especially police officers. I think a lot of that is for all the things that we went over. So there is a need for increased research amongst this population and what what can be done, to provide that. And I think it's very important that these departments, offer things like scholarships for treatment, um, rehab center payment plans. They have good insurance, so rehabilitation programs for first responders are crucial in addressing this. So it's very important for these specialized treatment programs for the first responders to help bring it out for them. So I want to open it up. Questions, comments, any final discussion that we can talk about this, any experiences, anyone wants to say anything, and I really want to thank you for the opportunity to do this today.
Before we open it up to questions, Christine, it's
Yes.
interesting as I'm sitting here and listening and had reviewed all this before, just how much a gamble of life it is to be a first responder.
Yes. I didn't want to face the stigma and shame. And I remember after placing my last bet, after knowing I was going to be investigated, my whole entire, family, I didn't want them to find out through a newspaper headline. And that day, when I was coming home conveniently from Atlantic City, I, I had decided that that was going to be that was going to be it. I was not going to wake up the next day. That was the decision that drastically changed because instead of, going ahead and taking my own life based on my experiences of losing friends and family members in that way, it kind of brought me back. So instead, I'm here today, obviously, and that's because of calling the helpline. I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't find I didn't find that it was going to be a bad thing at that point to reach out for that help.
And I mean, I just can share a little bit of my own experience, as limited as it was as a first responder working on an ambulance squad, um, that there were calls that you never knew what you were going to walk into, whether there was going to be a deceased body or, God knows what, but it was definitely, kind of that adrenaline mixed with fear. And, it really, and now I was 19, 20 years old when I was doing this, but, in retrospect, I realized just what a toll that period of my life had taken. And I'm sure, that's similar for you and any others.
Yes, and I remember, so many times, like my shift, I'd answer the call, send out the response units, then all of a sudden it's shift change. I pass all the information along. As soon as I got out of there, I went right over to the firehouse, and then I responded to that scene.
Hmm. Yeah.
So one, it's like, okay, I got the adrenaline. I dispatched a call. I got all that done. Now I'm ready, and now I'm gonna go answer a call. And it just all led into each other. So that adrenaline was like three times higher in a situation like that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would open it up. I know we have a lot of people here and a lot of people who are working in the field. Does anybody or has anybody worked with a first responder? And can you share a little bit of your experience of what it was like?
Lenny, I can tell you a little bit. Uh, Thank you, Christine. Fabulous presentation, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Um, I I am a retired first responder and military. I mean, I check off a lot of the boxes. EMT, firefighter, mental health worker, crisis responder, you name it. And to me, there's a significant difference between firefighters and cops. When I work with firefighters, I just found them to be a lot more guarded, uh, but they never worried, or most of them didn't worry about losing their job. Police always worry about getting their gun taken from them. And as an EAP, I work with a police department, and guys and women were always worried about could this evaluation result in them getting their gun taken away. Whereas the firefighters didn't have that same, or EMTs didn't have that same concern. Because you take a gun from a cop, that's it. Um, but to me, once they found out that I was a firefighter, it was always different. Then there's a lot more trust there. Um, I don't believe you need to be a first responder to treat a first responder, just like you don't need to be a recovering addict or alcoholic to treat them. But I think initially it opens up some things that might not open up to other folks. Um, but just the outright guardedness in the profession, and it's a self-protective factor. I mean, I saw stuff that I would never ever want other people to ever have to see in their life because it's just brutal. And what I didn't realize through the years was that it's chipping away at you. You're becoming harder and harder and harder emotionally, and you don't even know it. But thank you about the dark humor, because
Yeah.
to me, I've seen a lot of men and women get into trouble with the dark humor
Yes.
because we say stuff that we think's funny. Well, it's funny at the firehouse, or it's funny on the back of the ambulance, but it's not funny when the public hears it.
Right.
So thanks for talking about that.
Thank you, Kevin. I think I saw briefly in the chat that where the 12-step support groups for first responders only are. I did, I will get the information. I have not specifically known of any if they're not held individually. I can tell you that they are becoming increasingly popular now, as individuals start to come forward and as these things are, starting to be realized. And I think with the influx of gambling issues that we're having and the marketing and all of that, with all of that coming into play, I think we're going to see it more and more.
Good point. That's the one I know of. I'm sorry, Kevin. Yeah, the cop to cop
Up to
is
up.
self-help experience for police officers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christine?
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say cop to cop, but I treated two cops and a first responder. And they didn't want to go to cop. They really were very cautious about who knew. Just, you might have been, and thank you, Christine, for the presentation. They certainly didn't want their families to know all that kind of stuff or people to know, but they weren't interested in going to cop. So, as helpful as I'm sure it is, they didn't want to lose their jobs. And like
Right.
Kevin said about the gun, that's really, they don't want to use that gun. That's their protection. And now they're naked. Now they're naked without that gun, you know? And we talk about honesty's going to heal you. Well, they can't be honest in every situation. And some of them were deathly afraid of going to the 12-step program because maybe I'm going to see that guy that I sent to jail. And I know he threatened to kill me. So it's a different type of population, and they do live in some really scary areas of the state. And you can understand why they're feeling like that. So what do they have? You know? And and we know how doing those jobs, you're devoid of feelings. You can't. It's like going into the military. Why do they break you down? Because they don't want you to have those feelings. Because if you're part of a troop or a platoon that goes in and you say, oh my God, I'm not going to shoot that guy. Well, you're all going to die.
Yeah.
The problem is they're not broken down after or built up again after they leave the service. And I think that's a lot of the problem. So perhaps, it might help. I don't know, but have some kind of a support system within the sections themselves. You know, I know they play cards and all that kind of stuff, but maybe there would be some kind of a group that could get together to really talk about it. And yet, that's not what they want to do. So it
Right.
is a dilemma in a way. And it's not what they want to do because they got to go out on another call. So,
Yep.
you
So
know,
we're in the middle of a therapy session and there the bells ring. Okay,
yeah,
that lasted 5 minutes, and it's a very, yeah. You're absolutely right, Fran.
yeah, but
Reluctant to,
not so much a therapy session, but themselves.
right, with
And
us communicating.
yeah, yeah.
Trying to do that crisis. And I know that they did make it available if something bad happened that, okay, we're all going to sit and we're going to talk about it, just like you talk about how could the call have been better and this and that. But it always turns into, we're just laughing and joking, with that dark humor again.
Well,
You
yeah, but
have,
that's that defense mechanism again,
yeah.
you know?
And that's what those crisis interventions would turn into. But
Yeah.
it's definitely that lack of confidentiality, the reluctant, personal information. Now, of course, not without names, but I can say that my recovery, when I would go into the rooms, there would be one or two familiar faces that I saw. And that's not that wasn't surprising. And it was good though. It's like, all right, well, these people that, I used to be coworkers with and work on a regular basis, now they're coming too. So, you know, personally for me, having that influence and they know it's okay. There's confidentiality. I'm not gonna, say anything, and I'm just happy to see them there that this is getting out. I've had other other coworkers ask me for, hey, do you have any suggestions, for my son? Do you have any, suggestions? He's in college and I see them. They're on their phones all the time. And, these were my superiors that are coming to me saying, what do we have? So
Yeah.
it's only awareness, it's just that stigma and that denial is just there, and it's preventing further research. But to be able to get into the individual agencies and say, yes, okay, if you have a problem, go to somebody that's in-house, or, have those, specific treatments available. Absolutely.
May,
Thank you, Fran.
may I say something too?
Yeah.
This is Sally. My name's Sally. I'm from Integrity House. My
Hi,
di
Sally.
Hi. My director and I just yesterday did crisis intervention training with first responders in Essex
Oh,
County. And one of the things, like I'm just thinking about what Francis just said, is that they have resource officers that they can go to, which are definitely peers, and that seems to be helpful. But over the amount of time that my director and I have done the crisis intervention training, just like Francis said, they're very afraid of getting their guns taken away. They, because then they're basically out of work. They don't feel comfortable sharing with their partner, because if they are having a response to something, the partner feels unsafe. So they really have no one to go to. We have encouraged them to use cop to cop. But the other thing is that it's got to really come from the top, and because there's such that culture has gone on for so long, I think, where superiors have said, suck it up, don't
yes,
talk
yes.
about it, be tough,
Yep.
because, having something impact you seems like weakness. So yeah, I think it really is difficult, but I think there is a shift where they're trying to change that. But but yeah, it seems to me that, it just the people that are on top need to keep talking about how important it is to get treatment and that it's okay, um, and remove the whole stigma attached to it. So
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks for listening.
Agreed. Thank you, Sally. Appreciate the input. But all right.
Anyone else? I mean, it's interesting to hear the different perspectives that you have.
Can I just, Christine, what did you use to comfort yourself um, after the gambling, perhaps, or during the gambling? Was there, some people have some kind of a cuddly thing that they use. Did you use anything to help you get through, to feel loved?
Oh, absolutely. It was my dogs. Kind of fell into that. But that was one thing, and making my therapy a little bit easier. And then through that, when the suggestions that came up in therapy, maybe you should go talk to a psychiatrist. And I was like, wow. I was like, first of all, you got the first responder into therapy. Let's just stop there. But now a psych, what is that all about? But, I was invested into my recovery, and going to see I went to my first psych. He looked like Sigmund Freud, and within 15 minutes, he fell asleep. Yeah, true story. So the addict in me would have been like, look, I went, it did, look what happened. See, this is why I don't need that. But instead, my recovery was important, and I had very good support through my therapist, through my peers in the rooms. And I said, all right, I made another appointment. And that psychiatrist is actually still, I'm still with them, 8 years later. But she like sat down, and now the diagnosis comes out. Diagnosed with, of course, PTSD. Okay, that makes sense after 18 years of all of that. Then, OCD, you have compulsive behaviors because of, X, Y, and Z, especially the gambling. Okay, got it. And then to get diagnosed as bipolar 2, it was, wow, how long were they not diagnosed? Because it wasn't accepted to go to a psych. How long was that an issue? And here we are. So, like, all three of those things got to be looked at. And that kind of gave me the sense now I want to find out more about why I do these things, to lead me into all the things that I had to do. But no, I did rely on my dogs. I brought them everywhere because I knew if I had them, gambling wouldn't be involved. Taking them out got me outside. Traveling to every dog park and they went to dog parks in like 25 states. I did. I took, any trips that I was taking, we went to Connecticut to go to a dog park that's on a hill with a big rock. Like it was just, yes, I relied on that, to get me through. But then, for the time I spent inside, I didn't have them. I didn't even have GA my whole bid. So to lose all that support, it was just, it all happened the way it was supposed to. But
Yeah.
thank you, Fran.
All right. I think we're going to have to wrap it up on that note, and thank you to everybody who attended. And we appreciate your being here, and do know that next week we will have another presentation for you next Friday at 12 o'clock. Hope to see you all then.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Christine.
Happy PGAM.